Ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome to the BlockCrunch podcast, the go-to podcast for investors and builders in crypto. This episode of the BlockCrunch podcast is brought to you by CoinFlex and Paraswap. Stick around to learn more. All right, hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the BlockCrunch podcast. So Hong Kong, where I'm currently at, has decided to close down all museums in fear of COVID, which has pretty much crushed all of my weekend plans. Now, fortunately, one art gallery was open this week. And in that art gallery, they were showing things like CryptoPunks, psychedelic art, and a lot more. And the catch is, I went to this gallery inside my bedroom, actually with my Quest VR headset, because this gallery is completely virtual in VR, and all I had to do was slap on the headset and I could walk around for hours. And this gallery was curated by none other than Deeze, who is an NFT collector who's built quite a following in the past year, making a lot of successful bets in NFTs and also being deeply in the weeds. He's also involved in projects like Fractional and Neon DAO, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later on as well. So in this special episode of the BlockCrunch podcast, we're going to explore what makes a successful NFT collector and investor, tactics in identifying the next big NFTs, and frameworks in NFT investing and collection. So I'm super excited to have none other than Deeze on the show. So welcome, sir.
Thanks for having me, Jason. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So I understand actually before NFTs, you were a bit of a DeFi guy back in 2020. So how did you stumble into the NFT rabbit hole?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just go through the whole crypto journey in general real quick. If you go back to 2017, I had friends who I was playing daily fantasy with, like DraftKings and FanDuel. And they started taking some of their money, putting it into Ethereum, and they were making way more money just like buying Ethereum and other shitcoins than they were playing daily fantasy. So I just decided to copy trade them, and I took my whole bankroll out of daily fantasy, which was it was under 10 grand. It wasn't like I had a big bankroll, and I threw it all into crypto. 2018, I lost all the money I had made in 2017 because I had no idea really how to manage my risk or like actually have a portfolio that was diversified. And I just kept rolling all my profits from one shitcoin into the top of another shitcoin and then like holding it down 50 to 80%. Kind of realized, wow, I don't know anything about investing. I need to learn. Kind of went on a 2-year dollar cost averaging / like no degenerate phase where I was just buying Ethereum every 2 weeks. Pandemic happened, and now I'm working from home, and I have this little bag of Ethereum I've been accumulating for 2 years. So I get interested in Uniswap, which is really my first foray into like any DeFi product. I didn't even really use like the Ethereum blockchain until 2020, if I'm being honest. I had a MetaMask wallet, and I probably had less than like 20 transactions. And then Uniswap season happened, and I was just in Telegram all day, every day, looking for like the next Tendies coin or the next XAMP or like, the next opportunity to farm something like Wi-Fi. And it was a magical like 3 months, that July, August, and September. But in September, I was doing pretty well, and I had a friend tell me, hey, I'm taking some of my DeFi money. I'm buying this zombie CryptoPunk. It's like $15,000. You should buy a zombie too. You won't regret it. And I told my friend, like, you're fucking crazy. I'm just going to buy a floor. Like, I can't have, over 10% of my portfolio now in the zombie punk. Like, this is stupid. I already learned this lesson. So I just bought a floor punk, and I flipped it in like less than a week for $400. And as soon as I flipped the floor punk, light bulb went off in my head. It was like, oh, NFTs are just like trading rare items in an MMO, whether it's RuneScape or WoW. And once I had that light bulb go off, I was like, well, I've probably put like 700 days of my life into MMOs, and I traded a lot in MMOs, and it was like, okay, like this, I need to like give up on tokens and just do NFTs full time. So for the next like 4 to 6 months, I just sat in the Punks Discord every day for like 8, 12, 16 hours a day. And I just traded punks. There wasn't any bot action really. So you could just kind of watch like the new listings bot. And if you were paying attention and bought, like you could just flip based off of that. And I did that for the better part of those 4 to 6 months. And then too many bots came in, and like the strategies that I used just didn't make sense in a bot world. So I kind of just stopped trading punks and got into other NFTs.
That's amazing. And I love the dedication that you put into kind of mastering the NFT game just by spending hours in these discords. And it also sounds like you have friends who are very prescient and very early to crypto, right?
Yeah, I just surrounded myself with smart people. I had people telling me to buy Bitcoin in 2014 when I was playing
Wow.
RuneScape. They were selling their gold in the game for Bitcoin and then buying drugs. And in my mind, I was like, well, like that seems risky to get drugs shipped. I have a dealer who lives like 3 blocks from my apartment in college. I can just use PayPal and pay her. Like, I don't need this Bitcoin. She's not gonna know how this shit works anyway. Like, I blew it off for a good 3 or 4 years until later on my other friends were making so much money that I couldn't ignore it any longer.
Yeah, it sounds like you came around just in time. And you've been collecting NFTs for a while now. Do you know how many NFTs you own, or is it kind of too hard to keep track already?
It's somewhere between like 1,500 and 2,000, but that's probably a lot of junk too. I would say there's probably like 300 101s in there, like just like nice art. And then I don't even know how many profile pictures. There's a lot of regrets, right? Like there's certain things you meant 50 of or 100 of or whatever. You look back and the project's just dead. You just want to hide all of them. But yeah, I would say somewhere in the ballpark, maybe a little under 2,000, all things considered. That doesn't include all the spam too. That's kind of the frustrating thing about being a quote unquote NFT influencer. You get a bunch of just garbage sent to your wallet. And if you're like me, I'm pretty anal about trying to stay up on like every transaction that happens in any of my wallets. And it's impossible because just I get spammed fake NFTs all day, every day. And my Zerion app on my phone is just like, you received, punk and ape and whatever. And it's just all like fake flipped apes. Um,
Are
it's
all of your
hard.
wallets
Hard.
public?
Um, if you have like an IQ over 55, yeah. Like I don't really. I mean, there's. It's really hard to hide NFTs. If you see that NFT go to another account and it's not a sale, I
Mm.
mean, you could kind of assume it's probably my account, right? Like, that's the one thing with tokens that's a little easier. Fungible tokens, it's a little easier to obfuscate yourself. But with an NFT, it's like, hey, you have this unique identifier that's only for this NFT, and clearly you own it in some vicinity, whether it's the wallet it came from or the wallet it's in now.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm always hesitant to share some of the NFTs that I own, just because I know immediately people are gonna find out all the degenerate shitcoin gambling that I've done in the
Yeah,
past few
I,
years.
I will say at first I thought it was like a bug of blockchain. Like, wow, like there's no privacy. This fucking sucks. Like, I need some privacy. And as I made money in public, I am now like super thankful for the blockchain and like how open it is because I've been able to just show I'm credible by like showing people my wallets and like the trading history and been like, hey, um, take my word for what it is. Like I could be full of shit and know nothing, but like here is some verifiable proof that like I've done what I said I've done and not just like lied to you out of my ass. Like we were in a meeting in real life in LA with this guy. I'm not gonna dox who he was, but he's a big dude. And like another guy at the meeting just started talking out of his ass about DAOs. And then he wasn't even in a DAO, like he's never even launched a project, but like it was very clear this guy was just talking out of his ass. And it just reminded me of like how much I love how open like the blockchain is and how you can just be like, dude, are you in a DAO? Show me like, your NFT wallet. What DAOs are you in? Like and then they're like, "Oh, I don't know. I'm not in anything." Um, I just love how open it is,
Yeah, exactly. It's like show me your degen score, right? Don't show me your resume. That's gonna be the
right? The
new way
degen
people
score
are gonna
was
hire.
great. I
Yeah,
feel like I have a
exactly.
low degen score too. It was like 310 when I checked. I was like, man, I'm not even a degenerate.
Yeah, mine is very low because I split my activity across maybe like
Yes,
80 wallets. So
I that was my problem too. Definitely not 80 wallets, but during that Uniswap summer, I was using so many wallets that you can't get an accurate degen score. That is true.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess on that note about credibility, you have had a lot of big wins publicly as well. And I'd love for you to kind of just maybe bring out the most memorable one or one of your biggest wins in NFT investing and kind of what, if you're comfortable, what kind of magnitude
Yeah.
was that win?
Some of my bigger wins. I mean, I will always say that my biggest win isn't even realized right now. It's my hoodie 3D pipe CryptoPunk. Like this NFT is the NFT I'm most proud of. I stalked it for like 3 months. I got lucky and got it from the devs the day I was at work at my old job, and like I had to remove my bid because I didn't have enough ETH to like take their counter offer plus keep my bid up, and like I was sweating for 3 minutes, and like my heartbeat was like 2000 beats per minute or 200 beats per minute, and like it's by far my favorite. Realized wins though, like squiggles are highest ROI. I think I minted 50 some squiggles under $100 a piece, and in August I was selling some of those squiggles for like $30,000. um I bought like a Fidenza for 69 ETH and flipped it for 290 ETH within a month last August. That was pretty nice. Couple punk flips have been nice, but nothing like completely massive. But my goal with flipping punks was always more of like trying to make the market and be on the higher volume side with a lower spread rather than just like flipping and going for the fences. Um, but I think that Fidenza is probably the highest sale I ever have at like 290 some ETH.
Yeah, these stories of just rapid acceleration in price for NFTs just is insane. And I guess on the same token, I'm sure out of the 2,000 or so NFTs you hold, there have been some notable losses as well, like things that you just thought were going to be for sure wins, but just ended up going nowhere. What are some of the most memorable examples that fall into that category?
It's funny you mention that. I really only have a couple big losses, and I don't think any of them are like projects. They're just bad flips of punks. My biggest loss
Mm.
on any NFT, one of these punks I bought for 142 ETH right at the top in August 28th. I sold it for 88 ETH on Christmas Day. Um, that was by far my biggest loss. I had a really good run, honestly. I'm very cautious with minting new projects. So, like, if I mint a new project and lose, I'm never losing more than 5 or 10 ETH. So it's a very low risk. And I've had some of those projects go like down, but I wouldn't say that they were such a big loss that it was catastrophic. That punk was by far the biggest loss at like 50 some ETH.
That's really interesting. And I guess that ties into understanding your process as well, because from a service level, it seems like NFTs actually require more spraying and praying than say altcoin trading, which you've also done before. Because to me, it seems like a lot of these things do go to zero, but the ones that do succeed in becoming some sort of cultural icon or some sort of vibrant good, they produce massive, massive returns to make up for all of your losses. So how do you actually go about filtering what NFTs you should be buying, or do you kind of just like try to spread as many bets as possible?
Yeah, I definitely have a spray and pray approach. I think of a lot of the bets you're making on NFT teams very similar to like venture capital bets. You're just, you're assuming most of these are going to zero, but a couple of these are going to be your unicorns that make up for it. The most important thing for me when I'm buying a project is just the team. Like, can I talk to the team? Are they doxxed? Or have they been building in the community before? I weight a lot of just what I buy based off of the team. Like they might not have the best roadmap or the best ideas ironed out right at the beginning, but if I think they're people who I trust and like know that they're going to stick around and keep trying to execute, then I'll take a bet on them. I think I've been really lucky to get to this point where I can host Twitter Spaces talking to basically any team I want, and then bring up a good amount of people who I respect to also ask questions. And then, I don't want to say like we'll grill a team because we're not grilling anybody, but we'll ask, questions we want answers to for a couple hours. And after that, I know pretty much every time, hey, am I confident putting some ETH into their project or not? Um, Other than that, obviously you're looking for like community buy-in from other members of the NFT community. You want to I'm looking for like, are influential people buying this and talking about it, or is it more like a grassroots thing? If it's more of a grassroots thing, it makes me always feel like, oh, there's higher upside here because no other person's talking about this. So if I fuck with this community and get in before everyone else, then there's like a lot of upside here. I think a good example of that would have been like Galactic Gang when they came out. They're like this very psychedelic, um, trippy, I don't want to call them a profile pic project. They are a profile pic project, but like they look way too detailed to like really stand out in profile pictures, but they all look like pieces of art. And it was one of those things where like you talk to the artist, he's this very big psychedelic artist on Instagram, fully doxed, does like ayahuasca retreats, has a big community. He's basically like a shaman. And then you're like, oh wow, this guy's leading an NFT project. Like I need to bet on this in some way. So that's kind of like my main part of my process. It all really goes around the team and the community. Somebody on Twitter yesterday, I forget who it was, and I'm going to apologize for stealing their quote, but they said something like NFTs are an experiment in putting brand before product, or like you're betting just on like branding before there is any product. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at the space, because I'm always just thinking about like, what are the narratives or the marketability of these projects and these teams and communities, and how can they shift over time? Or, now I'm in a spot where I can help shift it. So, maybe how can I shift or adjust a narrative? It's another new lever I can pull and think about.
It's really interesting that you talk about teams because a lot of VCs when they invest in companies, not just in crypto, right? Web2 VCs as well, they also focus the most on teams, and their plan is that this team is going to execute and build a sustainable business model that scales and creates, value. Versus in NFTs is a little bit harder for most people to understand where that value is coming from. So I guess my next question, which I'm sure a lot of people are wondering as well, is how do you actually go about valuing these NFTs, right? What tells you that this great team is going to produce an NFT that's worth 10 ETH versus this great team that might produce an NFT that's worth 5 ETH? Like, how do you reconcile those things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think in the NFT space, it's really hard to have any real great like quantitative value. Um, there's so many variables, and so much of the market seems to just trade off of like mimetic desire and human psychology more than it seems to trade on like any type of fundamental analysis of treasury holdings or cash flow from royalties or any of that. Um, for me, like I am one of the least quantitative people in the NFT space. I'm really just looking at like, do I think I'll be able to sell this to somebody else in the future for more money? And just like very simple, like, is there going to be a bigger degenerate with a bigger book who wants to buy this from me at a more expensive price in the future? If so, I'm in. If not, I'll probably hold off. But in terms of just like finding quantitative data on NFTs and trying to value them, I'm a big fan of just looking at like the Nansen holder breakdown and trying to see like which whales are positioned in the project. And I'm at a point now where I know quite a bit of the whales, and certain whales have tendencies to like zero out their bag or just like completely dump it if things don't go their way and they're not happy. So if I see like one of those whales as the highest or a top 5 highest holder in a project, and they have over like 2% of the supply, I'm going to be more weary than if I see a project like a Zuki, where like the only person I saw who had over 100 when I first saw Zuki was like a team account. And I was like, oh, wow, this distribution kind of sticks out. There are like no whales who can really dump this. And that was when the price was like 4-ish ETH. So it went up to like 15 or 16 right after. And that was more just luck, right? Like I didn't think it would go to 16 in a month, but I thought, it had the community, the team, and some of the other common variables I've seen in other successful projects.
That's really interesting that a lot of the investment decision seems to be driven by kind of qualitative observations as well. So I guess going back to that point you made about thinking about who the marginal buyer is, who are these people who are out there buying, profile pictures for 15, 20 ETH each, or maybe metaverse land for, 15, 20 ETH? Are these mostly like funds or institutions or?
Yeah, it's quite a wide variety. First off, you kind of have your like crypto rich natives who are just people who've been around Ethereum for at least 4 years at this point. and have a lot of money to just, well, they have a lot of Ethereum to throw at things, and it doesn't feel as expensive as it is. I think maybe a good example of that is Tim Kang, or Illustrator. He very early to Ethereum and has one of the nicest NFT collections. A lot of people give him credit for maybe starting the NFT bull run when he bought the Beeple Master Collection back at like the Q4 2020 timeframe for $777,777. A lot of sevens. But I think we started to see funds come in toward the second half of last year or so, or that's when I started to notice them. I had friends who were selling bags to institutions, specifically art blocks and death beefs. Thought that was interesting. We have these other high net worth individuals who are not crypto rich, but come into the space. Someone like Kazomo DiMedici, I would say, is a decent example of that, where I think I think someone like Kazomo is more affected by like the mimetic desire of participants who have been here for a while. Whereas like the people who have been here for a while, I think they're just buying what they like and doing their own thing more often than not. You also have, I mean, a lot of new, like, I don't call it like DFS money, but people who came around January 2021, toward the end of January, when John Bales and Peter Jennings bought the John Morant moment on Top Shot and wrote an article, and Top Shot just went like absolutely fucking insane for a month or two, and it's been down only ever since. But that insanity sparked a lot of degeneracy from people in that DFS community, and they got involved with apes. They got involved with all those summer projects, whether it's like Cool Cats or Zed Run or whatever. And now they're like, new crypto money. And they have completely different preferences than the old crypto money, which seems to have different preferences to the institutions. So I think it's about trying to narrow down, like, is an institution going to buy this versus like, is a degenerate going to buy this? And if so, like, what time frame do I need to wait on? But for example, I'm holding out on some very nice art blocks, just praying some fucking NFT institution or fund like comes in and fires on them. I don't want to sell them for the market price they're at, because I saw what happened in August where I didn't sell them at the top and now they're down like 80%. And at this point, I'm just like, fuck it. Like, maybe an institution will come and see some of those buys that we saw in August and copy them, and it'll be okay because they're like, oh, we have comps. This is traded for this price before. It's all right. But I'm holding my breath, you know?
That makes sense. And that's really interesting because that Top Shot example, right? It did achieve some sort of cultural relevance or a lot of people buying in. And then, as you mentioned, the price has been doing nothing but down only. Is that the eventual, I guess, the eventual path for most NFTs where, once traders or savvy investors like yourself have sold it to, say, institutions, there's really no marginal buyers left. Like, who is going to buy from the institutions? And in that case, if no one's buying, it just kind of ends from there. Is that kind of the pessimistic outlook that most NFTs can expect, or is that a very unique thing to NBA Top Shot?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with Top Shot is just the oversupply. I think if you compare Top Shot to maybe like the Art Blocks curated issues we've seen, they're similar, where the founders are just like, we relish the oversupply. We want there to be an oversupply. We want people to be able to come to our site and either buy packs or generate art on demand. We don't want people to have to wait. And that's kind of the ethos of those platforms. So when you know that that's the ethos and they're completely open about it, then that might make you hesitate on, buying some of the rarer NFTs in those ecosystems. First, something like punks. Like, I know there's never going to be a 10,001 punk, or a 20,000 punks or whatever. So it's a lot easier for me to trade that. And I think like a lot of traders think the same, where they're looking at locked sets where like, hey, this is minted out and there isn't new stuff coming out. Seems to be where there's more excitement. And that's also where I focus my time.
And a lot of these very profitable NFT trades that happened in the past, like year or two, happened in the middle of a NFT bull market when a lot of institutions, whales, and crypto rich people are trying to buy in as well. But over the long term, right, do you see any of these retaining value? Is there maybe are there one or two NFTs that you would be happy to hold for like the next 10 years and be confident that this is going to or end up being worth a lot more in 10 years than it does today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's my two forever pugs. One of them I've listed like $22 million. I never expected to sell, and then the other one I don't have listed, but it's my wife. I would gladly hold those for 10 years. Uh, I love them. I have them painted. They're in my house. Like when I look at them, it just reminds me of coming from nothing and creating all this value for myself. Um, Other than the punks, I love squiggles. Like I think art blocks will be an important platform in 5 or 10 years. I don't think all the projects on that platform are going to retain value, but I think the squiggles, being the Genesis project from Snowfro, have the highest chance. Um, in terms of just like how my bags are weighted in NFT land, my punk bag is by far the biggest. After punks, my second biggest bag, I believe, is Squiggles, and then Clonex, and then Azuki. Clonex, I just bet on the Artifact team. I put less than a couple ETH into their products like last spring. I just held them all year, and they created like 100 plus ETH out of thin air for me just by holding them. And like when a project does that for you, I think you have this um it's not a moral obligation, that's not the right word, but you have this like innate obligation in your mind sometimes to always just hold and support. Like I've seen it happen with projects I don't support at all. Like Pixel Vault's a good example where I'm not involved. I don't love the I don't love how the vault was created, and I've been a pretty negative like proponent of the vault. But everybody in that ecosystem who bought the original comic and held it made 5 plus ETH just from holding a comic that they paid basically nothing for, and now they're just like diehard supporters of that whole team no matter what that team does. Like that team could extort people, they could do whatever, and there's gonna be people who are like, "Well, they made me money, so I don't care. Like I'm here for life." And I think probably that's how I am with Clonex, even though I don't want to admit it.
I think it's really interesting how many parallels there are to altcoin like fungible token investing as well. Where if you
Hmm.
look at the communities that were made rich in the most organic way, so not VCs who got it maybe pre-seed rounds, but people who just kind of bought an exchange and made a ton of money. All of those communities, regardless of the quality or the traction of the product, they have incredibly vocal proponents. Some of them are sticking to these projects thick or thin. They're just going to hold a token forever. So it sounds like there's an element of that. But I'm also curious. So it sounds like for your investment thesis for things like punks, it comes from a very personal place. Like you like the art, it reminds you of your own story. It also made you a lot of money, so you have a certain attachment to it. But is there an objective case that maybe someone who doesn't share the personal attachment to punks could still find attractive in terms of looking at punks as an investment? Like, is there something that's more universal from an investment perspective for some of these projects that you're holding for the long term?
Yeah, I mean the punks narrative kind of goes around them being the first profile picture community to really stick around. Like they definitely weren't the first NFTs. They were an early example of NFTs, but they weren't first. But in my mind, they were the first community that came around in 2017 and actually like stuck around and went on to build things. A lot of people from that punks community are people who are NFT OGs who went on to build their own projects. You have Nate, Alex, and Jimmy. You have Nate, Alex, and Jimmy. They did the Avastars. They run Nameless. They run NFT 42. They help launch VFriends. They're involved with a ton of shit. You have Snowfro from Art Blocks, who I think doesn't need an introduction, but he claimed over 20 zombies, started selling them in 2020 to fund his baby, which is Art Blocks, and has always just been like a big member of that community. And other than that, with punks, you are really just betting on like in my mind, the art and the narrative that hey, these were like one of the first NFTs, and people will still think these are important because they've been important the whole time. It's kind of like the Lindy effect, but with NFTs. I think punks are the most Lindy NFT by a few years. Um, Personally, like I don't have big bets on apes or anything. I find it hard to value this token airdrop objectively, And I think the hype will get the best of them. I'm always super wary of hype in the NFT space, like constantly trying to sell hype anytime I see it. It's really the only time you get like these liquidity events to get out at nice prices. If there's no hype, you're just undercutting floors and praying somebody comes along. But yeah, in terms of like objective valuations, it's tough. I think you're really betting on just narratives, and you're betting on those narratives to not change. That's scary for a lot of people.
Before I continue, I'd love to share more about our latest sponsor, CoinFlex. Now, CoinFlex is an exchange that's been around for a while. They're actually doing $1.5 billion in daily trading volume right now. Now, recently, their team reached out and walked me through their latest product, the AMM Plus. In short, it lets anybody earn fees as market makers on the CoinFlex exchange simply by depositing their assets. As of this recording, the 7-day in-range average for ETH AMM pool depositors is 82%. So how does this work? If you're familiar with how other AMMs out there work, this is very similar. You can basically select what price range to provide liquidity for, and the UI even shows you your risk under different scenarios. I also love that they have this cross-collateral system, so you can market make in any market you want, using pretty much any collateral you have. If you know how to manage your risks, you can even access up to 10x leverage while providing liquidity. So this is one of the most creative ways I've seen a company borrow elements from DeFi in a centralized exchange setting. So I highly encourage you to check it out at coinflex.com/AMM. I'd love to share one of my favorite products in crypto with you. Now, whenever I want to trade a token, instead of going to Uniswap, SushiSwap, Bancor one by one to see where I can find the best quote, I just go to Paraswap to scan for the best price anywhere. Because Paraswap aggregates all the popular Ethereum dexes and saves me a ton of time and headache in finding where I can trade something for the best price, and lets me trade in one place. Now, the cool thing is they've also integrated with Ledger Live as well, meaning I can now swap at the best prices directly from my Ledger wallet. So seriously, if you're a DeFi trader and you're worried about the security risks of centralized exchanges, but you also don't want to scour dozens of dexes just to find the best price, you have to check out Paraswap. So head on over to paraswap.io/blockcrunch. Yeah, I totally agree with the hype part. I think the most successful NFT little punt that I did was one that no one was talking about at the beginning, and I just thought, well, this seems like a pretty interesting concept. Someone on my team was paying attention to it, and it just ended up pulling, I think, like 50x or 100x, which is just absolutely
Which
insane.
project was it?
This is a project called NFT Worlds. It's these kind of
Oh
metaverse
yes,
lands.
I minted one for free, and I still own it.
Yeah, I still hold
I
a
feel
large
really
chunk of it.
dumb for not getting any more. Like I saw they were free. I saw they were like basically free on OpenSea. And I was like, I only need one. Like I'd never do that. I never tell myself like, oh, I only want one. You always need at least like three, so that you don't feel bad when you sell one.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and it was more of a lucky punt from my side, and I had fortunately a very good team that kind of looks at these things a lot of the time, but yeah, I totally agree with that point about running away from hype and investing based on just kind of objective analysis here. And I'd love to touch on kind of your thesis and your involvement in different NFT projects as well, because you're a part of Fractional Art, which allows people to fractionalize their NFTs, which I think is quite meaningful because, as you mentioned before, as NFTs start to scale, the only people who can buy them are the institutions, the whales. The little guy can't really participate. So this idea of fractionalizing your NFTs into small bits that anyone can buy, or most people can in crypto probably can buy, I think is really interesting. And you did this to one of your punks. So can you talk a little bit about the thesis there, and what was the reason for your involvement there?
Yeah. When I first heard of fractional NFTs, it wasn't the fractional platform I work for, but it was actually Niftex. And it was back when I was new to punks in 2020. And they fractionalized an ape CryptoPunk. And I just thought, like, wow, this makes a lot of sense because I can't afford any of those fucking apes, but I'd like to, maybe own a piece of this one. And now I have a shot to do it. But at the time, the way the pricing and liquidity and the governance was with Niftex, it wasn't super intuitive, and seemed like it would be really hard to ever have a buyout of the ape and like realize any type of gain outside of just hoping that like the token traded for a higher price in the liquidity pool. So I didn't really think about fractional NFTs for a while, and then fast forward like 6 months, I'm listening to Delphi's podcast, and Andy, the one of the co-founders of Fractional, was on the podcast, and he explained fractional in like 5 minutes, and I was listening to it while I cut my grass. And after I cut my grass, I just DM'd him immediately and was like, yo, I think you're doing like everything right with going about NFTs, specific fractionalizing NFTs, specifically the way that you're doing the reserve price for the auctions, like makes way more sense than Niftex. I think it's genius. Is there any way I can like help out? You know, let me know. And then he DM'd me back same day, and we hopped on a call, talked for like 2 hours. I talked to the other co-founder for an hour, and at that point, I was like hired on the team. I think I was like the fifth employee. Um, but my thesis on fractionalized NFTs is very simple. It's as more and more garbage enters the space in terms of projects, it's harder and harder for new people to enter the space and not have like a bad experience minting and losing money. I think fractional is the answer to the problems of like lowering the entry to get in. With fractional, you're basically letting people buy any any NFT. Um, they could collect a fraction of like a punk. They can collect a fraction of an ape. They could collect a fraction of the Doge meme. They could collect fractions of photography. It's up to whatever they want, but they don't need to commit. In the punk's case, $200,000, or in the Bored Ape case, $250,000 to get one. They could just spend $100, $500, whatever. And I think it really unlocks the upside for both the owners of the collection, like punks and Bored Ape owners, but it also unlocks downside protection for the fractional buyers, where like your punk is not going to zero overnight. Whereas if you mint a project for 0.3 ETH, there's a very high chance that you wake up the next day and it's 0.1 ETH or zero. So I think that's basically my bull case on fractional, is just fractionalizing any NFTs allows anybody to get in, and they don't need to worry about barrier to entry. Right now, the biggest barrier to entry is gas, and I'm really excited for when we're scaled to L2s and also other L1s. I think that'll be a big boon to our average user, because while it is easy to do, it's still expensive with OpenSea or Uniswap fees. You're still paying between $30 to $100 most days to make a transaction, and for somebody with a $1,000 to $5,000 bankroll, that's just kind of an unacceptable rate.
Yeah, I hear you on that, and it's really interesting to hear your thesis on fractionalized NFTs. And another thesis, or should I say, area of interest that you have is also photography NFTs. Um, so, can you explain what is the reason for your excitement behind them, and what are photography NFTs?
Yeah, I got really excited about photography NFTs in July of 2021. Before that July, I had only collected twin flames from Justin Aversano. And the reason I collected the twin flames is because Justin came into the Punks chat like maybe February 2021 or so, and was doing a fundraiser called Save Art Space. He was putting up punks on billboards in Miami for Bitcoin Miami, and he was partnering with G Money, who is a reputable name in the space. And I was like, all right, like I'm gonna buy one of your twin flames for like 1.5 ETH. And a few weeks or maybe a month or two later, I bought another twin flames, like 4.5 ETH. And that was the only photography NFT I held until July. July comes around. I'm hosting Twitter Spaces at this point. I'm very new to Twitter Spaces, but I'm just loving it. Like I'm meeting all these people who I've never talked to, and they're just coming up on stage and speaking. And one of them was this photographer named Kath Samard. And she was recommended to me by Justin, who was the only photographer I owned NFTs from. So she comes up on stage and starts talking about her trip to the Canadian Rockies and Patagonia and these other remote locations, and starts talking about how like she's using Google satellite and these different like earth mapping tools to lay out shots and compositions, and she's like laying out like astral maps over them so she knows like what the sky is going to be like the day she's there. And she's talking about like all this setup basically to like get one of these pictures. And until she had talked about it, I never really thought about it. Like I was just like doom scrolling Instagram looking at great photos and never appreciating like any of the thought that went into them. So after I heard her talk for a couple hours that night, I just bid on one of her pieces. And that was the first photography NFT I bought that wasn't Justin's. And it kind of ignited this fire where I would bring up more photographers on stage, talk more about their processes, and then if I liked them and I liked their process, I would just buy their art. Uh, and like buying photography 101s, if you want to talk about like things going to zero, um, every photography 101 I buy, I assume that I mean, no, so let me preface, not even photography 101s, but any 101 that isn't a collectible outside of the X copy I own, I basically have written it off to zero immediately, in my mind, because I don't buy any of this stuff to make a profit, really. Like, that's not the primary incentive. The primary incentive is like support artists I really like and have a badass collection. I think I have like 5 on cyber galleries now that I'm really proud of, and I just keep building them with the art I keep buying. um, but if I backtrack a little bit, by marking those to zero in my mind, it allows yourself to hold them for very big wins. What I mean by that is, like, I sold one of my Justin Aversano Twin Flames for 120 ETH. I also have a drift piece that I paid half an ETH for, which is now worth like 50 ETH. And I told Drift, I'm like, hey, I'm not going to sell this to like over 100 ETH because I know you're going to get there. And even if you don't get there, like, I'm super stoked just holding this because I love you. And that's how I think about a lot of my photography NFTs. Like, I might only ever sell 10 photography NFTs for a profit, but the profit I make from those 10 sales will outweigh the net spend. And in the process, I get to help a ton of artists get out of jobs they don't like, whether it's shooting wedding like doing photography for weddings, whether it's working for a brand you don't care about, putting creative energy into somebody else's design and ideas. Like, I kind of just want to help liberate artists to do what they want to do and see what happens. So that's kind of my thesis and kind of the way I buy 101s.
That's really interesting. And I'm just on OpenSea looking at some of the Justin Aversano Twin Flames photography that you mentioned. These things are selling for $200,000, $300,000. Like, it's very expensive for for my uncultured eyes, right? I don't understand photography, but for what is essentially a photograph, it seems very expensive to me. And I'm curious, what got you over the line that made you think, hey, these things can be worth a lot more than where they are now.
Because I think at the end of the day, like, the content isn't the important thing. Like, it's just a picture, and you see hundreds of pictures or thousands of pictures on Instagram. But the important thing is like the narrative behind that picture and the narrative behind that artist. And also just like you're betting on the artists themselves. Like, unfortunately in the NFT space, like, you want to bet on extroverted artists who are out there like every day telling their story, spreading their narrative, regurgitating that very I don't know. Like, a lot of them have like a very simple narrative. It's like, hey, I come from this, I do this, this is my passion. And then it's like they repeat that narrative so much that like people know them in the community as that person because they've repeated it so much. So I think like in Justin's case, he was um in the beginning borderline annoying. Like, he was so aggressive in the punks chat. Like, I remember when I first saw his name, he came into 2 discords I was in all the time. It was punks and it was artbox, and he had sold a Twin Flames. Like, this was when the Twin Flames cost half an ETH and they just came out. He had sold a Twin Flames and he was looking for like the owner of the Twin Flames, and he saw that the owner owned like Squiggles and Punks. So he just kept coming in the Punks Discord, going to the Artbox Discord, pasting this dude's address and being like, does anybody know who this is? Please help me find my collector. I need to connect to them. And like, he was doing this like 3 days. And after a couple days, someone in the Artbox Discord was like, dude, we don't fucking know this address. We would have told you. And after that, like, you could tell that like he kind of shifted his strategy. But like, that was my first impression. I was like, wow, like, this guy is determined. Like, it's kind of annoying that he's coming in every day, but like, he's the most determined artist I've seen try to meet a collector since I've been trading these NFTs for like the last 6 months. So when I phrased it like that, it was like, okay, like, there's something special about how he's acting. And that's why I bought one, right? Like, it's kind of weird to think that way, like I didn't buy it because I immediately was struck by like the piece of my twins, but I bought it because I was more struck by the person who created it. And then as I talked to him, more of like the idea behind the whole twin collection rather than just like any other one twin. Um, the idea behind the twin collection is that Justin, the artist, had a twin, and that
Mm.
twin passed away before they were born. So like he has felt this connection to a being that never really physically existed with him, and he felt like he had to like capture other twins as a way of showing homage to his lost twin in a way, like in a karmic, uh, like very spiritual way of doing it.
I think you're right. Yeah, the narrative, hearing you talk about the story behind it is much more compelling than just looking at the
And
photo.
I never cared about the narratives or stories until I hosted Twitter Spaces. And then by
Mm.
hosting Twitter Spaces and hearing people's voices, you hear all the emotion, you hear the sadness, the pain, the frustration, the triumph, the excitement. And like you don't get that over text, or at least I don't. Like when I'm reading text, it's just like whatever. Like if it's more than 3 paragraphs, I barely have the attention span to read it. But I can listen to people talk all day. And when I got them in a space, it really opened up that different mode of thinking. Like, wow, there's a lot going on here that is not quantitative at all, that you just need to like listen and kind of vibe with. Um, and that was a big, turning point for me in my collecting career, because before that I was just flipping profile pictures. I wasn't, collecting any art. I had
Speaking
a
of
couple Killer Acid 101s. I think that was about it.
Actually, speaking of collecting art, one thing that I did want to ask before I move on to the final part, which is talking about how newcomers can get involved. One thing that I always thought about NFT investing is that it sounds a little bit like modern art, and there's a lot of venture element here as well, in the sense that you really need one winner to make up for all the losers. Versus traditional art investing, you probably only buy artists that are already established,
Mm-hmm.
in the hopes that these maintain their value over time. And cynical part of me always thinks that for modern art, at least, uh, the success of a collection or piece of art is completely dependent on the reviewers, the critics, the tastemakers. Do you see the same in NFT land as well, or is it a little bit more kind of grassroots and organic?
Yeah, I would say that it seems like a mixture, but I always feel like there's at least one tastemaker involved trying to push the narrative. There definitely have been grassroots projects. To me, one of the best example of grassroots projects is a project I completely missed out of like my own hubris and poor analysis, and that was Bored Ape Yacht Club. It was like the biggest, freest win I could have ever had. And at the time, I saw that Pranksy had minted over 1,000 of them, which was over 10% of the supply. And I know from Punks and Top Shot that Pranksy's a person who will bottom out his bag. Like he'll sell every last one to get out. And I was like, well, I'll just like wait till he sells these. Like these clearly aren't going to go anywhere if he owns 10%. Like he's going to dump them. But the community was so strong, like they bought all of his apes between like I don't know 0.25 and 5 ETH, and like by 5 ETH he had no apes, and now there's like over 5,000 ape owners, and they have this massive community of people who are like super dedicated to apes and the ape ecosystem. And then like the Kennel Club comes out and they get more free money, so they're even more uh indebted. And then mutants come out and they get serums, just more free money, and they're like, wow, like we fucking love the apes. I think the apes are like one of the biggest grassroots things I saw in front of my eyes that I didn't buy into until the floor was 7 ETH. I bought like 5 apes when the floor was 7, and
Hmm.
in hindsight that was brilliant. But like at the time, I remember thinking to myself, man, I can't believe I wouldn't buy these at half an ETH or 0.25 ETH because Pranksy owned 1,000. And now that Pranks doesn't own any and these are over 5 ETH, I love them. Like, what the fuck? Like, what happened here? So that was one of the first times where I realized like the power of like just a grassroots community buying dips and holding. Um, I think the art blocks community is another grassroots community. Like a lot of people who were involved with early art blocks came from punks or just came from the love of generative art. And then they just held because they like Snowfro. Um, and they were very rewarded because, these squiggles were $80 and now they're, I don't even know what they are now, maybe like 7 or 8 ETH, but at one point they were 15 ETH. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think like you don't really need too many influencers, but you definitely need like one or two to get the ball rolling. Like if you have like the grassroots community is kind of like a bunch of Tinder on the forest floor, and then like one or two tastemakers buying something and talking about it is like throwing a lit match onto that Tinder sometimes. And if that
Mm.
Tinder is very well spread out, you could light the whole thing on fire really quickly, and big things can happen. But if there isn't a lot of Tinder, then it fizzles out really quickly and you don't get too much of a fire.
Yeah, absolutely love that analogy. I think that really clears it up. And from what you're describing, it's really interesting. There's like elements of art collecting here, where there are tastemakers that define what culture might become. There's elements of venture investing, as I said before. There's also like elements of, I guess, more popular pop art type of investing, like music or movie investing, where you really require a lot of people, a lot of kind of everyday people to be interested and actually engage with the art for it to have value. Versus art
Mm-hmm.
investing, where maybe you need like 5 billionaires to like this art and it will have value. With NFTs, you really need everybody to buy in. So there's like art, movie, venture investing all mixed into one. It's such a weird space.
No, definitely. There's like a lot of music platforms I feel like are gaining traction this year. And, buying a musical NFT, like you have to listen to the music. That's a couple minutes each time, right? To just view it. You have short films being worked on. Like Jolie Pacino, Al Pacino's daughter, did an NFT project where she sold like photos from a film that she's working on, and then like the proceeds go back into the film, and like people who own the NFTs help her with the film and stuff. Like, I think we're really just scratching the surface with how we can engage audiences and build cool things together rather than just like be a consumer of somebody else's vision that they put together. Um, and yeah, I think to what you said with the traditional market and a few billionaires, like there's still parts of the NFT community that are like that, right? Like I feel like something like X Copy might be a good example where as long as there's like 3 to 5 interested millionaires in his pieces, like they're gonna probably stay at the price level they're at. And if more people come in, then there's even more competition for them. But they can sustain themselves with like a very low quantity of very high net worth individuals who are interested.
I guess I dare say that there's probably more skill involved in NFT investing in the long term, because you almost need to predict what culture, like what mass culture will be. You need to predict what the masses will determine, will become some sort of Veblen good or cultural icon over time. Whereas for art, if you buy a Picasso, you probably won't lose money in the next 10 years.
Yeah, definitely. You're also getting a way higher upside, I guess, with those NFTs, right? Like with anything, where there is that greater risk, there is a way greater reward. You're probably not going to 1,000x a Picasso over your lifetime.
That
As
makes
with everything in life, it's like the more risk you take, the more reward you can get, it seems like. But there's always a sweet spot of just how much risk do I want in my portfolio, which I learned in 2018 the hard way.
Yeah, and I think that ties back really good into my last question, which is, for people who are now at the stage where you were at back in 2018, right? People who are just looking through the window and seeing all these crazy things happening in NFTs, they want to get good at this, they want to invest. What are the best ways for them to really extract that alpha and really stay up to date with what's going on?
Yeah, so the most beneficial things for me were being active on Twitter and just like being, I don't want to say like a reply guy because I don't ever think I was a reply guy, but I would just like try to create conversations with a bunch of people I looked up to and try to figure out like in between shit posts how to maybe provide value so that if somebody hit my page off a shit post, then they see like, okay, like he's not just somebody shit posting all the time, but there's a brain here that I might be able to get something useful from. And by doing that in public for so long, I just made good friends. And by making those good friends, it kind of led me to a lot of the opportunities I've had, whether it was the punks, whether it was DeFi summer. It was like by sticking around, like the most important thing in this space is just to survive. Like if you're down a lot of money right now and you're depressed about this space, like put money in every 2 weeks from your job. If you don't have a great job, maybe focus on like just upping your income so that you can make more money to have risk capital to take bets with. Like, I'm still fairly young now. I'm still under 30. And when I got into crypto, I was under 25. And I was very comfortable like losing all that money because I knew that the upside was too good to ignore. And I think that like a lot of people who come in, they're not actually okay with losing, or like they're not, if they are okay with losing, they just keep losing, but they're not learning from their losses. So it's like you have to be okay with losing, but you also need to learn from those mistakes, and you like can't keep making the same mistakes twice in this space. I know people who stuck around from 2018 to now, and they're like still not past their 2018 all-time high, and it is like eating at them mentally in private discords, and I feel bad because they did almost everything right, but they made the wrong trades or investments this time around, even though they were still here. So I guess stick around, survive, make good friends. Only risk money that you're 100% willing to lose, and if you need more cash flow to take those risks, and like do what you have to do in real life. I'm not advocating for doing illegal things, but um, you know, you got to get the bag up somewhere to start taking risks. And whether that's another job or another stream of income, like I think a lot of people just want to come in, maybe work a $15 an hour job, put in $100 every 2 weeks, and just like make it. And that's really hard to do if you don't have good cash flow from your job to take risks with. So
Yeah, I totally agree. Because I think for every Deeze, there's probably 100 NFT investors who kind of blew up their accounts. So it's definitely high risk, high reward type of situation, and I definitely appreciate that insight. And for people who want to reach out to you or keep up to date with what you're working on next, what are the best channels for them to do this?
yeah, so my Twitter is at DeezeFi, DeezeFi. That is by far my most active platform. I'm on Twitter all day. I just made an Instagram called Deeze NFT. I post GM pictures there. For the people who don't know me, like I just post a picture of a way of smoking weed, and then like a water or a coffee or something to drink, and then like maybe another drug that I'm on that day in a picture, and I tweet that picture every day. So I made an Instagram just for those pictures. Other than that, you can find Fractional at fractional_art on Twitter. Yeah, that's really where I spend all my time. It's either I'm in the Fractional Discord, or I'm on Twitter, or I'm on Telegram.
Definitely. And I'm really looking forward to your next weed review on Twitter.
Oh, yes. I have a lot of work to do for that one. Um, hopefully, I'll have it out by tomorrow.
Awesome, man. Well, Deeze, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. Thank you so much for coming on. This is really fun.
No, thank you for having me, Jason. I'm glad I can make it.